If you're new to our channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.
Now back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Garden Radio Show with your hosts, Joey and Holly Baird.
Holly, let's go to the IV Organics 3-in-1 Plant Garden Hotline, go up to the Pacific Northwest to bring in our next guest.
Ann Accetta Scott is an author, blogger, speaker, entrepreneur, and homesteader. A once suburban housewife turned sustainable homesteader, she is passionate about the movement of cooking from scratch, clean eating, food ownership, preserving the harvest, natural living, and the art of living simply. Welcome to the program.
Did you unmute? Oh. Welcome to the program, Ann.
Hi there.
Hello, how are you doing today?
We're doing good.
Thank you so much for taking time to join us on the program and enlighten us and our listeners on some of your homesteading activities.
Oh, great. Yay. Thanks.
Well, let's start out with this. Like many of our guests, they didn't grow up in the location in which they currently are at. You did not grow up on a homestead. How did you get into homesteading, and why did you choose this path?
In truth, it was my husband's dream to actually move out of the suburbs. We were right in the middle of Microsoft, Expedia, Google County. And he decided that he was just done living in that environment. And his family actually comes from a long line of gardeners, home preservers, hunters, and whatnot. So he decided that he was going to move us just right on the outskirts of it all, right in where farm country starts on 2 acres. And we moved out here about 5.5 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, great. So are you on speakerphone? You sound a little bit far away.
I am. Let me get off.
Okay, thank you.
Hold on. Is that better?
Yeah. Many people hear the word ferment and think beer or yeast possibly, but in the world of homesteading or even gardening, fermenting is another way to preserve food. Can you expand on that a bit, and what are some ways an urban gardener could use fermenting to help preserve some of their harvest?
Well, the first thing we think about when it comes to fermenting for most gardeners is sauerkraut, right? So sauerkraut is actually a fermentation process. So it's captured by a wild yeast that actually roams around in your home, and then it lands on the food, and from there the good bacteria and the beneficial bacteria forms. The sauerkraut that most of us are buying in the market, the supermarket, is actually been processed. If you're going down the canning aisle, for example, it's been processed. So all that good bacteria is no longer available in that. So if you are making your own sauerkraut at home, which can last quite depending on the temperatures of your home and where you're storing it, it can last a good couple of months. And that is the process of fermentation. Other items are things like mead. You can make mead from your garden items. You can make mead from foraging for dandelions, elderberries, for example, blossoms and things like that. That's fermentation as well, too. Pepperoni is fermented, if you think about it in a sense. So, I mean, in regards to your garden, you can pickle just about anything in a fermentation process. Sourdough bread is another one. Kimchi, all your kimchi products are fermented from your garden. So when you think about it like that, the process is actually extremely easy. It's your salt to water ratio with your food items. And then from there, it actually becomes fermented by sitting on the counter because the bacteria grows in it, the good bacteria and beneficial bacteria. And then to slow down the fermentation process, you actually end up putting it in a refrigerator or a cooler unit, like a root cellar, for example, or a cold room storage. If you we live in the mountains, so we're 10 degrees cooler than town is itself. So we're able to keep a lot of our ferments just on the counter for quite a bit. Kombucha is the rage of the country right now. You could do fruit and vegetable for heartier kombucha for a second ferment on that as well too. It's one of my passions. Well, get everybody fermenting.
Well, what do you find that people, what is the biggest mistake people make when it comes to fermenting or trying to ferment?
I think the biggest mistake is that, fermenting is a lost art. That initially was the way that most people, between curing your food and fermenting, that was how our ancestors actually preserved food. Canning is new, or relatively new, to the world of preserving. And so when we go back and think about it, it's people are not aware of how simple it really is. So they overthink the process. Okay, they overthink it, and then they mistake in things like what we call scum, which is just basically yeast that floats on top of your jars, or yeast that settles to the bottom of your jars as mold. So they become discouraged and they'll toss it. And it's just the education process of knowing what to look for, knowing what your ratios are. But in truth, you can ferment with any herbs and spices that you wish. It's just knowing what a true ferment would taste like. And because we are now just getting really reintroduced back into the world of fermenting, people are just learning that aspect of it. And I think with others, it's the fear. You know what I mean? So the mistake is that they don't know what they're doing, so they choose to just be safe on their fermenting process, and they choose to not do it. And then they feel discouraged because they don't know how the outcome should officially taste.
Right, and that's the thing, that people are uncertain, and there's a lot of great resources online that will walk you through step by step. Now, there's a lot of junk online, too, so you have to filter through.
Exactly, yeah.
Many people think that many people do not think about using a dehydrator as a way of preserving the harvest, and you can find dehydrators for a very cheap price at yard sales, rummage sales, thrift stores, as we have found ours. What are some ways you can dehydrate to preserve?
You know, dehydration has actually jumped up a world from where it used to be. When you're dehydrating with a Nesco dehydrator, whatnot, and, that's a great brand of dehydrator that is available for a very, very, very reasonable price. Those dehydrators are great. They're actually stacked or boxed in a circle form, and the fan is placed on the top of it. Generally, dehydrators like that work great for drying herbs and flowers. Herbs if you're doing it for medicinal purposes, flowers for the same thing for medicinal purposes. A lot of soap makers will actually dry a lot of their items that they're going to be using for soaps or lotions, salves, or tinctures, for example, for those of us who study using holistic medicine in a way. And, that's your basis, right? You can, dehydrate apple chips, for example, kale for kale chips, just the basics that you have there. But as you're leaving the basic form of a dehydrator and you're going into a little bit more advanced, and this is still available to just the general public, there is a dehydrator that has a back-facing fan, so a rear-mounted fan versus a top-facing fan. And that dehydrator generally comes with temperature settings in regards to a lot of a lower setting, and it goes a little bit to a higher setting. And then on top of it, it comes with a timer as well, too. Now, this particular dehydrator actually, for those who consume raw live foods, for example, where dehydrating in like a Nesco dehydrator actually completely would dry your items, right, for long-term storage. You put a oxygen absorber in the drawer, and then you vacuum seal it, and your goods are dried for, up to a year with, the essential oil still absorbed into the item. This other dehydrator actually goes so low that it actually keeps the item in its live form, so beneficial live form, and then it is actually more of a nutritional value for the person consuming it. A lot of vegetarians and vegans will use this particular dehydrator because you're still getting the beneficial full pack of the vitamins that the actual plant actually has to offer. I mean, a dehydrator is great for, you can raise bread in a dehydrator, for example, make yogurt, fruit leather. What else is there? Some will even use it to dry their eggs for long-term storage. Just like fermenting, dehydrating is just reaching like extremely crazy new levels in being able to utilize it for food preservation. And the one thing I want to say real quick about dehydrating is that it is important that after you have, because for us, we dehydrate so much in regards to providing for culinary purposes, providing for soap making, providing for medicinal purposes, that it's important to store those dry goods, to a point where there is no oxygen in it. So the oxygen absorber is important, and actually vacuum sealing your jars, it's, if you're not going to use it within the next couple of weeks to the next month or two, if I'm not going to use it until spring, I know that I got to get that oxygen out of my jars to keep my food still dried. And most people don't realize that.
with a dehydrator, which is it better to have a fan in it, or just a gravity like coil at the bottom, or is it really depending on the purpose of what you're trying to dehydrate?
The fan is important because the heat is entering the dehydrator, right? The fan is then moving that heat around, moving the moisture out of the air. So that's what the fan is for. Now, those who have a top fan on top of your dehydrator, most fans are found on the lid of a dehydrator, right? The stackable ones. And what happens is that tends to not dry your foods evenly if you have more than 2 or 3 stackable trays in there. So what tends to happen is people will have to rotate their trays in order to get all their food within that dehydrator dry properly. If you have a back-mounting fan, for example, that fan blows all your trays simultaneously, so you don't have to rotate trays around in order to get your foods to dry out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we find that when you stack that 10 or 12 trays up, you got to continue to rotate those trays.
Yes, exactly. So the nice thing about the nice thing about the rear-facing, the back-mounted fan is that you're using less electricity. You're putting less energy into supervising your dehydrator. And then on top of that, you're getting a little bit more multiple use for that type of dehydrator. So I started off with 3 Nesco dehydrators. That's what I had. All 3 would go at the same time, and then, gradually over the years, I realized that, it's better to pay your bang for your buck if you're really truly interested in preserving your garden harvest long-term purposes. And, and I bit the bullet. I bought the dehydrator, and then since then it's led to a world of owning a freeze dryer. You know what I mean? So it depends on where you want to go and how much food you actually have to preserve for the season.
Definitely. Now, tell us about your book, The Farm Girl's Guide to Preserving the Harvest. What can people expect from it, and anything notable in it?
Well, The Farm Girl's Guide to Preserving the Harvest was written because, just like you guys said, there's so much information out there on the world of the interwebs, right? Some of it good, some of it bad, but because I did not enter this lifestyle that we currently live as sustainable homesteaders, I had to educate myself from basically the bottom up. I didn't know how to grow food. I didn't know how to raise my own livestock. I didn't know how to preserve my harvest. So I started bottom up, and I ran into a lot of issues. And as I started becoming more seasoned into the life that I lived and a little bit more, equipped and prepared, and I started to realize that, with the website and the blog and our social media accounts, that people truly didn't know where to start. They don't know where to go after they start. They don't know the logistics of what they're doing and how they're doing it and how to store it long term. So when I wrote the book, I knew that, it was important to write all methods of home food preservation in it, everything. We're going from canning foods to drying foods to fermenting to how to store it properly in the freezer, and then from there, if you are at a point of, mastering that, then how can I store it long term into freeze drying my food items? We're talking long term, 10, 12, 20 years of storage. So each chapter is broken down based on your skill level. So if you are already, a great canner and you're ready to move on to fermenting, each chapter gently flows you into that process with steps on what you need to know, why it's done this way. When you're fermenting foods, are you using a 5% salt brine or a 25% salt brine? And the difference between the two is, and I go in and I explain why. If you're going to just do it for everyday consumption, a 5% salt brine is great. However, if you're not going to be using this for a good couple months down the road, a 25% salt brine is going to be saltier, but you wash out the salt, but your food is going to be preserved a lot better and a lot longer. So, each chapter is I wrote the book, and I think the biggest compliment I got, for those who follow me and know me, the biggest compliment was, I love being able to read it, and I knew that I was in your kitchen with you, working with you. And because it's overwhelming, right? You can pick up all these great books, and then it's still overwhelming because you're still confused by it, or you can go online and, but this book was step by step, let me hold your hand, a comprehensive guide on where you're at, what you're doing, along with my family favorite recipes, and and how to utilize the foods that you have. So that was why the book was written the way that it was. it's just a great guide to have.
Well, where can we find your book, and where can we find more about you and follow your journey?
The book is actually available on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, some Sam's Club locations, Books A Million. I have some on my website as well, too. And to learn more about us, we can actually follow us on our website. It's farmgirlinthemaking.com, on our social media accounts under a Farm Girl in the Making, Instagram, Facebook. And we basically speak of our everyday journey, what's happening, where we're at, what we're doing, and teaching individuals how to enter this lifestyle and how to ease into what you're doing and where you're at without feeling overwhelmed.
Well, Ann, we greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us on the program and enlighten Holly, myself, and all of our listeners on more of the homesteading life and what we need to do to preserve what we grow.
Great.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.